Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big one, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Absolutely. A figure everyone knows or thinks they know.
Exactly. And we want to get past those simple labels, hero or tyrant. Our mission today is really to understand the system he built, how he grabbed power and held on to it through this amazing mix of politics, image, and, well, empire.
Right. And we're leaning heavily on some great sources, particularly material from Skylar Fiction, which really digs into historians like Howard G. Brown and Ludo van der Heyden.
Okay.
Their work helps us see the complexity, the paradoxes. It wasn't just about his flaws. The contradictions were kind of central to how he operated.
Okay, let's dive into that. Howard G. Brown uses this idea of a dynamic triangle to describe Napoleon's rule. What were the corners of this triangle?
It's a really useful model. So first corner, Napoleon himself, the individual. He's this outsider from Corsica who becomes the absolute symbol of France.
Right, the meritocracy guy.
No.
Rags to riches, almost.
Yeah, he embodied that idea that talent could take you anywhere. But, and this is the twist, he also subtly undermined that very principle to consolidate his own power. So there's tension right there.
Okay, so that's one corner, the man, the myth.
Exactly. Second corner, the French state itself. Remember, it was incredibly shaky after a decade of revolution, just looking for someone to impose order.
Ripe for the picking, basically.
Pretty much. And Napoleon jumped on that. He retooled it, centralized it, and really laid the foundations for the modern French state machine.
Got it. And the third corner.
That's the Napoleonic Empire, constantly pushing outwards, grabbing territory, installing relatives on thrones. This wasn't just about land grabs. It created this aura of destiny around him. And crucially, it gave him the perfect excuse for tighter control back in France.
So these three things, the man, the state, the empire, they weren't separate. They were interacting.
Constantly interacting. That's the key. His personal image, his charisma, it boosted the state's legitimacy. The strong state then made the empire possible. And the empire's success, the victories, the loot, it fed back into his personal myth, made him seem inevitable. It's like this self-powering engine.
That engine idea leads right into his image making. This is where I find him fascinating. He was like a PR genius, centuries early. How did he craft that legend?
Oh, he was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
Utterly strategic. Those famous bulletins he sent back from the battlefields.
Yeah.
They weren't just reports. They were stories. Carefully written narratives painting him as this, invincible, brilliant general, always calm, always in control.
And the portraits too, right? Even when he was just first consul, he looked like an emperor already.
Exactly. Regal, timeless. He understood that symbols could be as powerful as armies. Every image was calculated.
What about that nickname, the Little Corporal? Was that real or part of the spin?
Totally fabricated, or at least heavily amplified by him. It made him seem down to earth, one of the guys, someone who'd earned respect in the trenches.
Yeah.
Genius touch, really.
Yeah.
And then the ultimate PR move. Crowning himself emperor in 1804.
Yeah.
Grabbing the crown from the Pope's hands.
Yeah, that image is iconic.
It sends a clear message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
My power comes from me, from France, not from God or tradition. Pure political theater.
Stephen England said Napoleon chose to write his novel on the world, not on paper. How does that fit with the Romantic era he lived in?
It fits perfectly. The Romantics loved grand narratives, big emotions, larger-than-life heroes. Napoleon basically cast himself as the protagonist in France's national story.
Giving them order after chaos, but also drama.
Exactly. He offers stability, yes, but also glory, destiny. He turned politics into this epic tale starring himself. And the strategic goal behind all this myth-making, to blur the lines, make it impossible to separate Napoleon the man from Napoleon the movement from France the nation. He became the indispensable symbol. And how do you overthrow a symbol? It's much harder than just getting rid of a leader.
Right. So France, after the revolution, they were just exhausted, weren't they? Looking for stability above all else. How did Napoleon deliver on that?
He totally understood that mood. People were tired of ideals, tired of bloodshed. They wanted quiet. He promised order, and he gave it to them.
But how? What did that look like day to day?
Well, it involved a mix. Administrative reforms, yes, making things run more smoothly, but also a heavy dose of police surveillance.
Yeah.
And military force when needed. It was very much a security state.
Meaning?
Meaning appointed officials, prefects running the regions, reporting directly to him, hand-picked judges, strict censorship of newspapers, plays, public talk.
Wow.
And our sources mentioned some pretty grim statistics, like over 2,300 executions without trial, just between 1800 and 1802.
Yet people accepted it.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
After the reign of terror and the Directory's instability, this felt like a relief to many. Even if liberty was curtailed, at least there was order, predictability.
So there's this paradox. He's a strong man, absolutely, but he's also building a more professional, modern state structure underneath.
That's exactly the paradox. While he ruled through his personality, his charisma, he simultaneously set up systems that would outlast him. Things based on rules and positions, not just loyalty to him.
Like what kind of systems?
Think career civil servants, standardized pay scales, promotions based, at least in theory, on merit, not just connections. This started to take the raw politics out of day-to-day administration. It's the beginning of what the sociologist Max Weber later called legal rational authority, power based on law and bureaucracy, not just personality.
Okay, and where does conscription fit into this state-building picture? That sounds less professionalized.
Conscription. That was the engine's fuel, a massive operation. Between 1804 and 1814 alone, something like 2.4 million Frenchmen were drafted.
2.4 million.
Huge numbers. And while it was presented as a citizen's duty, it wasn't equal. The rich could pay for a replacement, basically hire someone poorer to take their place. So the burden fell heavily on peasants and the working class. It served the needs of Napoleon's war machine, not really the ideals of liberty or equality.
So, as his own myth expanded, his imperial ambitions grew too. Was he trying to, unify Europe under French ideals, or was the empire mainly about propping up his own power back home?
That's a key question. Howard G. Brown argues pretty convincingly that it was mostly a survival strategy.
Survival. How?
Well, think about it. Peace was actually dangerous for Napoleon. If there were no wars, no external threats, people might start asking, do we really need an emperor with this much power?
So war kept him necessary.
Exactly. Constant conquest bought him time, prestige, money, and kept feeding that myth of invincibility. Every victory justified the system. Every relative he put on a foreign throne cemented his dynasty and chipped away at Republican ideas.
It really does sound like a system that couldn't stop. Like that phrase you used, a snake devouring itself. It just had to keep expanding or collapse.
That captures it well, I think. It was fundamentally unsustainable. More expansion meant more enemies, which meant needing more soldiers.
Which brings us back to conscription.
Right. Historians have called it the blood tax, the most brutal part of the whole machine. Iservola called it the ultimate frontier of state building because it reached so deep into ordinary lives.
Was there much resistance to it?
Oh, absolutely. Alan Forrest's work shows widespread resistance, especially in rural areas. Young men running off to the hills, whole villages collaborating to hide draft dodgers, mothers bitterly cursing the regime. It wasn't just passive acceptance. There was real opposition, born of real suffering.
So while the Grand Army is marching across Europe, the state at home is getting tighter, more controlling to keep this whole thing going.
Precisely. The demands of the empire fueled repression at home. Prefects weren't just administrators. They were monitoring public mood. Secret police were tracking anyone suspected of dissent. Journalists faced jail or exile. Liberty was sacrificed on the altar of unity and imperial ambition. Control was everything.
This brings us to a really dark chapter. Napoleon presented himself as upholding revolutionary ideals like liberty and equality, but the sources point to a massive betrayal, especially concerning Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, as it was known then. What happened there?
It's a critical and often overlooked part of the story. In Saint-Domingue, you had this incredible situation where formerly enslaved people had fought for and largely won their freedom, inspired by the French Revolution itself.
Led by Toussaint Louverture, right?
Exactly. A truly brilliant general. He allied with the French Republic, drove out the Spanish and British, and effectively governed the colony, believing that France's promises of liberty applied to everyone, regardless of color. He kept the French flag flying.
But Napoleon saw it differently.
Dramatically differently. In 1802, he issued the Law of 20 May. Its purpose, to restore slavery and the slave trade in the French Caribbean.
Restore slavery after the revolution had abolished it.
Yes. It's staggering. A complete reversal. A moral catastrophe, as our sources put it.
But why? Why would he do that? It seems to contradict everything the Republic stood for.
Van der Heyden suggests it boils down to cold, hard colonial pragmatism. France had just gotten back islands like Martinique and Guadeloupe, where slavery hadn't actually been abolished, often because the British had occupied them.
Okay.
So Napoleon faced a choice: impose abolition everywhere and risk destabilizing those valuable sugar colonies, or sacrifice the freedom of the black citizens of Saint-Domingue and Guadeloupe for the sake of imperial control and economic benefit. He chose the latter.
What was the impact on the ground?
Devastating. News of the decree ignited fierce resistance. Napoleon sent a huge expedition under his brother-in-law, Leclerc, to crush the rebellion in Saint-Domingue. Louis was treacherously captured during a supposed negotiation, shipped to France, and died in a freezing prison cell.
And in Guadeloupe.
General Richepince led an equally brutal campaign there, defeating the resisting soldiers, many of whom chose suicide over re-enslavement and reimposing slavery with extreme violence.
So Napoleon, the supposed heir of the Enlightenment, becomes its executioner in the Caribbean.
That's a powerful way to put it. But the story doesn't end there. Despite Leclerc's initial successes, yellow fever wiped out thousands of French soldiers, including Leclerc himself. The remaining Haitian forces, now led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, fought back with incredible determination.
And they won.
They did. In 1804, Haiti declared independence, the first free black republic, the second independent nation in the Americas after the U.S. It was a monumental achievement, born from Napoleon's betrayal. It fundamentally challenged the idea that liberty was only for Europeans.
It really forces a reckoning with his legacy.
Absolutely. And think about figures like General Thomas Alexander Dumas, the novelist's father, a celebrated black general in the Revolutionary armies. Napoleon essentially discarded him, let him languish and die after being captured. Why? Because Dumas was a living reminder of the Revolution's universalist promise, a promise Napoleon was busy betraying. He didn't fit the new narrative.
This connects directly to the bigger question Heyden raises in his work. Was Napoleon ultimately just? And did a lack of justice contribute to his downfall?
Exactly. Heyden's core idea is that those revolutionary ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, they need something concrete to survive. They need fair processes, rules that apply to everyone, what he calls procedural justice.
Meaning the system has to be fair, not just the leader claiming to be fair.
Precisely. Leaders have to follow the rules too, especially when it's inconvenient. Early on, maybe General Bonaparte showed some of that tactical fairness, merit, but Emperor Napoleon, the sources suggest his moral compass cracked.
How so?
He started systematically dismantling procedural justice, rewriting constitutions to give himself more power, packing courts with his supporters, ignoring parliament, using surveillance, exile, even execution to silence anyone who disagreed. Justice became just another tool for him to wield.
And the reinstatement of slavery fits perfectly into this pattern of ignoring established rules for his own ends.
It's a prime example. The law said these people were free citizens. But political expediency, economic pressure, he just declared an exception, ignored the moral foundation of the Republic. Heyden argues this wasn't just one mistake. It showed a deeper rot.
A willingness to trade principles for power.
Yes. Sacrificing people for profit, equality for control, truth for propaganda. The argument is that the empire didn't just violate French ideals, it collapsed because it eroded them from within.
It makes you think about Max Weber calling him the peak of charismatic authority. But charisma isn't enough, is it?
Not in the long run. Charisma works only if people believe it's linked to something real, something just. When Napoleon's actions consistently contradicted his image, the endless wars, the nepotism, the betrayal of revolutionary values like in Haiti, the charisma started to wear thin.
People started seeing behind the curtain.
Exactly. The myth got old, his own generals got tired, allies started peeling away, the system ran out of steam. Waterloo wasn't just a battle lost, it was the final consequence of a system built without a solid foundation of justice. That crucial element was, as Heyden puts it, mything from the blueprint.
So here we are, 2 centuries on, still debating him. But the sources emphasize that how we remember Napoleon isn't straightforward. It's curated, selective. How does that play out, especially in France?
It's intensely complicated. Official memory is often awkward. You had President Chirac, for instance, refusing to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Austerlitz, maybe Napoleon's greatest victory. Why? Because of the shame associated with the reestablishment of slavery that followed?
A thundering silence, as Heyden calls it.
Yeah, in some official historical narratives, there's this discomfort, almost an embarrassment, that leads to Napoleon being downplayed or selectively remembered. Institutions focusing on national memory have sometimes sidelined him.
Though writers like Victor Hugo or Chateaubriand certainly didn't sideline him, they saw him as this epic, almost supernatural figure, right? Above Europe like an extraordinary vision, or great for bringing order, if not liberty.
Absolutely. But those are interpretations, colored by their own times and perspectives. It reminds me of that Anais Nin quote, borrowing from the Talmud. We do not see the world as it is, but as we are.
Meaning each era sees the Napoleon it needs or wants to see.
Precisely. The 19th century needed a romantic hero. The 20th, struggling with totalitarianism, sometimes trying to map him onto that, often inaccurately. Our century grapples with his legacy of centralized states, his administrative genius, but also confronts his racism and repression much more directly. He really is a mirror.
Which makes you ask those questions again. Why is Napoleon a household name, but General Dumas is barely known? Why is the Haitian Revolution still sometimes glossed over?
Because memory isn't just recall. It's an active process of selection, emphasis, and sometimes erasure. It's a battleground. And Napoleon, the master strategist, understood that controlling the narrative was crucial. He wrote his own first draft of history, and that set a powerful template. Controlling the past is a way to shape the future.
He died so long ago, yet his methods, his successes, his failures, they feel relevant. What's the main lesson we can take from his biggest flaw, choosing control over justice?
I think the key takeaway is how modern his system looks in some ways.
Yeah.
Strip away the 19th century uniforms, and what do you have? A system combining mass surveillance, state-controlled narratives, propaganda, centralized bureaucratic power, and the mobilization of the population for state goals.
As you said, it sounds familiar.
It really does. Maybe the tools change, handwritten bulletins become social media feeds, imperial portraits become curated online profiles, conscription becomes economic coercion, sabers become spreadsheets, but the underlying principles?
They persist.
Many states today still operate on similar logic. Systems promising security, but potentially eroding liberty. Promising efficiency, but sometimes sacrificing equality. Using narratives to manage populations. Van der Heyden explicitly links this to current events. Things like Brexit, Trump, the global rise of strongman politics.
He sees a pattern.
He sees these as symptoms of the same fundamental tension. What happens when societies start trading debate for obedience, truth for narrative, humility for domination? His warning is stark. When justice becomes optional, collapse becomes inevitable. Maybe not immediate military collapse like Waterloo, but a collapse of trust, of social cohesion, of democratic norms.
And what about that great man idea, the belief that history is shaped by singular, powerful individuals? Does Napoleon's story support that?
It seems to on the surface. He certainly had immense impact. But the sources push us to look deeper. History isn't just shaped, it pushes back. And the real cost of that greatness was paid by others.
The forgotten ones.
Exactly. Toussaint Louverture, General Dumas. The millions conscripted. The people enslaved or re-enslaved. Their lives were the raw material for his novel. So maybe the question isn't just, was he great? But rather, why are we still so often drawn to worship greatness, even when it comes at the expense of goodness, of justice?
So if Napoleon represents the pitfalls, what does a just leader, or maybe a just system, look like in contrast?
Based on van der Heyden's analysis, justice isn't just a nice-to-have ideal. It's the actual supporting structure. It's what holds the whole thing up. A just leader, or just system, is one where the laws apply equally, even to the powerful. Where dissent isn't crushed but listened to. Where leaders accept limits on their own power. Where governance relies on trust and legitimacy, not just charisma or control. That's the kind of strength, the argument goes, that truly endures. Ultimately, Napoleon's legacy is this huge paradox, isn't it? He helped forge elements of the modern world, the centralized state, the legal codes, the idea of meritocracy, however flawed. But he also serves as this unintentional warning about what happens when power detaches itself from justice, when the system forgets the people it's supposed to serve.
He famously said, "What a novel my life has been." It's a great line. But like all novels, it eventually ends. And maybe the question left hanging in the air is, who gets to write the final word? Who tells the truth?